When you're at the end of your shift as a delivery driver, there is one sentence that is worse than any other to hear. "Hey Hal, hold up a minute. I've got a customer on the line." My shoulders slumped and I felt a mix of exasperation and annoyance as I turned back towards the front counter. Please tell me you're joking. I had just finished helping clean the pizza parlor after an 8-hour shift of manning the phones and register, and running over what must have been half the county delivering orders. I had locked the front door and been in the middle of heading into the back room to clock out, mind already at home, where dinner waited for me and my fiancée lay in bed, ready to roll over and wrap her arms around me once I climbed in beside her. But my boss's call had put a delay to that. I stood there for a few minutes, staring at his hulking figure as he leaned against the imitation brick, listening intently to whoever was on the other end of the line. Aside from his quiet replies and the scribbling of a pencil on his notepad, the only sounds that could be heard were the hum of the building's ventilation system, which sounded like blues or swing music crackling out of the ancient radio on the back, and the constant smack of the rain against the glass on the front windows. I waited, shifting impatiently on the balls of my feet. Finally, he hung up, turning to me, but I spoke before he even had a chance to open his mouth. "You cannot be serious, Tony. I've already locked up for the night and finished cleaning. Everything's powered down and, more to the point, we're closed." I pointed behind me to the clock ticking on the wall, which showed the time to be almost 10 at night. In response, Tony's face darkened and he also pointed a meaty finger at the clock. "Actually, Hal, if you take another look, we're not officially closed for another 5 minutes, and you remember our motto." He pointed to the large sign over the front counter. "Whether an hour to close or a minute, if you order, we make it happen." His scowl intensified. "That's been our creed since my father opened this joint 70 years ago, and it's not about to change now." I let out a groan. "Dude, you take tradition a little too far, you know that." The man didn't respond, instead turning back and picking up the order that he had scribbled out before continuing. "Anyways, the gentleman ordered 3 pepperonis and said that he'd give the delivery driver a nice tip to compensate for ordering so late." Now he did turn back, giving me a sly look. "And I thought that you could always use the extra dough, that getting a few extra bucks would be something that you would jump at." I felt a sudden intense heat and I forced myself not to begin hurling the string of insults at his smug face that I so badly wanted to. When I had moved back to my hometown with my fiancée to help take care of my sick mother 3 years ago, trying to find a job that I could use to pay the bills had been like trying to find a needle, not just in a haystack but in a grain silo. The place had really fallen apart since I had left in the late 2000s, in large part due to the fact that many of the people my age weren't sticking around to help tend the farms or stores like they had for generations. With the shift of the last 2 decades, they had instead left for the cities, leading many farms to fall into foreclosure and businesses in town to either economize or flat out close up. And with our savings rapidly dwindling, and Rita's remote job not set up yet, I had no choice but to snatch up the first opening that I could find, as a cashier and sole delivery driver for the only pizza place still open. So yeah, the job wasn't ideal, but it paid the rent in the small apartment that we had grabbed above the old hardware store, but only just. Every extra dollar that I could make was vital to keeping our heads above water. Tony knew that, and he had delighted in running me ragged every chance he could for what amounted to scraps on a stray dog's plate. And I seriously hate him for it. I glared at the man for another moment and then let out a resigned sigh. He had me by the short hairs and knew it. "Fine," I grumbled, holding my hands up and walking back across the room to stand next to him. A smirk crossed his face and he patted me on the shoulder, handing me the notepad as he walked past me. "Just deliver these and you can head straight home afterwards. You can bring the money in with you in the morning. And hey, I'll even be a nice guy and make these myself." Real kind of you, I thought bitterly, but I held my tongue. Instead, I looked down at the papers, silently reading out the order before lowering my eyes to the address that had been given. and I felt a slight pang of surprise shoot through me. The address was one that I had never heard of before, which to somebody born and raised in the area was not something that I was used to. "Where the heck is this address, Tony?" I called out, turning and watching as he fired up the wood oven, dough and ingredients already laid out on the metal counter. He shrugged. "I honestly don't know, Hal. Never heard of it before either, but it's not the first time. Don't forget those big shot developers who bought up a lot of the farmland have been building those subdivisions out here for the last 5 to 10 years, trying to get people to move out here. Chances are somebody was actually dumb enough to buy one, and that's where it is." He turned back to begin making the pizzas before calling over his shoulder. "Anyways, he gave directions to get there. They're written on the back." I stared at his back for another few moments, and then shrugged as well. Makes sense, I guess. Half an hour later, I stepped out the back door into the pouring rain. Bending over to protect the boxes, I made a mad dash for my car, which sat almost at the other end of the parking lot. By the time I reached it, jamming the keys into the lock, my coat was soaked and my hair was matted to my forehead. Dropping the pizzas into the passenger seat, I dropped into the driver's seat and I yanked the door shut. Yanking off my jacket, I threw it into the back seat and smoothed my hair back, rubbing my arms and shivering slightly as a loud rumble of thunder came from outside. Unbelievable. February weather. I muttered, leaning over to open my glove box as I slid the key into the ignition in the center console. After fumbling for a moment, I pulled out a battered map, flicking on the dome light as I unfolded it, shifting my gaze between it and the directions. I traced my finger over it as I read the first few lines, which led me out of town onto the back roads. But it wasn't long before it became useless. This thing was about 30 years out of date, showing nothing besides a dead end where the directions told me to turn. "Great," I muttered, dropping it on top of the pizza boxes and starting the car. No GPS to help me either. This is what you get for driving a Saab 900 from the late 80s. Should have taken Rita's suggestion and bought a TomTom or something. I let out another sigh. No point in crying over spilled milk now. As I flicked on the headlights and wipers, the warmth from the heater beginning to blast into my face, I saw Tony locking the back door. He gave me a curt nod before running to his truck. The bitterness reared its ugly head again, and I watched him drive away, knowing that he was heading home to his own soft and warm bed. But I shook my head to cast it away, releasing the parking brake and shifting into first gear. The car rolled forward and I cast a last look at the darkened shape of the pizza joint, flanked on either side by a video rental store and shops which had boarded up years ago. It and the laundromat are the only things keeping this strip mall from going the way of the dodo, I said to myself. Turning left, I headed down the main drag, the last of the dark buildings sliding past as I headed out of town. Wanting to break the silence filling the car, I fumbled with my iPod, which was connected to a cassette adapter in the car stereo. A moment later, the opening notes of The Bates, The Lips of Jane Mansfield spilled from the speakers. Tapping my fingers on the steering wheel to the beat, I glanced at the directions again. They said to take a couple of turns once I had left town, and after making sure that I had enough gas to make it there and back, I began what I hoped would be a relatively short journey. But whether it was due to my bad mood or the crappy weather, it seemed like an eternity. I kept glancing around as I made turn after turn, seeing only farmland and forests. As the minutes ticked by, my irritation grew, especially after a new thought had entered my mind. I really hope to God that some dumb teenagers didn't decide to prank the place by ordering pizzas out into the middle of nowhere. It wouldn't be the first time. Due to the lack of things to do, it had become a pastime of theirs. More than once I had found myself in an empty house with an order in my hands. Even though he had been the one to fall for it, Tony had always directed his anger at me for it, occasionally even docking my pay for something that was out of my control. "I really don't need that again, man," I grumbled, reaching out and cranking the radio as Depeche Mode began to play, trying to drown out the thoughts. The darkened shape of a farm flew by on my left, and I allowed my foot to ride a little heavier on the gas, the speedometer climbing to 40 as I rounded a bend. According to the directions, the turnoff should be just ahead. I braced myself to see nothing more than the yellow dead-end sign proclaiming my venture out into the boonies had been for nothing. Instead, to my surprise and admittedly relief, I came to a three-way intersection, one which had a street sign at the corner. I flicked on the turn signal and slowed, squinting to see the words displayed on it. Sycamore Street. Letting out a breath I hadn't realized I had been holding in, I turned right and headed down it, my optimism rising as streetlights began to appear frequently, lining the side of the road like sentries. And a few moments later, as the road dipped into a valley, I finally saw it. Whoa. Tony had certainly been right about subdivisions being built out here. I was staring down at rows upon rows of houses, which seemed in the dark to stretch away as far as the eye could see. I could also see larger buildings, ones that had to be stores of some kind dotted around. No wonder I never heard about this place. It's an entirely self-sufficient community, I whispered. I felt a sharp pang of bitterness, this time not directed at my boss, but surprisingly towards the community before me. I knew with the inevitable march of time that nothing could ever stay the same forever, but the idea that as my hometown slowly dried up and died, another was rising so close, replacing the farms that I had known all my life and more or less wiping out what came before, stung me more than I cared to admit. I shook my head slightly as the car headed down the hill. Just focus on finishing this up, and you can go home, Hal. But as the community rose up before me, another thought suddenly dawned on me. The directions the caller had given Tony had detailed how to get here up to this point, along with the street and house number. But they hadn't said where to go once I had gotten here. I let out an exasperated groan. The way this place looked like a maze from the top of the hill, it'll take half the night to find the house. The feeling of defeat began to creep back up on me, until my eyes spied the first building that I was approaching. It was a gas station, one which had been decorated to resemble those of the mid-20th century. I could see a display of oil sitting in front of the first set of pumps, the bottles and cans glinting in the overhead lights. Breathing a sigh of relief, I turned into it, parking under the awning and shutting the car off. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, closing my eyes and listening to the rain pelting the metal awning as another rumble of thunder reverberated through the valley, and then I pushed the door open and stepped out onto the concrete. Instantly, the smell of rain and gasoline invaded my nostrils, causing them to burn slightly. Slamming the door shut, I jogged across to the door of the accompanying convenience store. Reaching out, I pulled it open, stepping inside as I heard an entrance bell chime somewhere out of sight. The sound of the rain dulled as I stepped inside, replaced by the sound of the buzzing lights and tick of a clock somewhere as I looked around. The counter to my right was empty, the register left unattended. Bags of snacks and rows of refrigerators fought for space with rows of auto parts and fluids. I couldn't help but let out a small snort as my eye spied a row of Boone's Farm bottles set next to the windshield washer fluid. A somewhat messed up thought sliding into my mind. Hope nobody grabs the wrong bottle by mistake. Turning and walking to the counter, I spied a bell. Reaching it out, I gave it a small tap, the shrill metallic sound echoing in the store. I waited for a few seconds as the echo died away, replaced once again by the buzzing lights, hum of the refrigerators and the ticking clock. Nobody opened the door to the garage or came out from the restroom in the back corner. I drummed my fingers on the counter, and then I spared a look at the watch on my wrist. 11:15. Come on, man, somebody. I hissed, reaching out and smacking the bell again, this time a bit harder. The sound reverberated in my ears, and as it died away again, I felt my exasperation begin to bloom into annoyance. Finally, after what my watch told me had been 5 minutes, I turned around, heading for the entrance and resigning myself to search for the address. "Hey, excuse me, can I help you?" The voice which came from behind me almost caused me to jump a foot in the air as I whirled around, unable to keep a surprised grunt from escaping my lips. A man now stood at the counter, smiling at me as I fought to get my racing heart under control. After a moment, he spoke again. "I'm very sorry I didn't come right away. I was in the bathroom when you hit the bell and well, you know, the call of nature can't be stopped once it's started." He let out a chuckle at his own quip and then repeated his question, still smiling. "Is there anything I can help you with?" For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. The fact that the guy had somehow left the bathroom without me hearing the door open, or the sound of his feet on the tiled floor, had almost given me a heart attack. The dude must walk like a spec ops soldier to pull that off. Finally regaining my composure, I stepped back towards the counter, pulling the directions from the pocket of my jeans and clearing my throat. Yeah, if you could please. See, the pizza place I work at the next town over got an order from here, and the directions that I was given only get me as far as here. They gave me the street name and house number, but with how many roads I saw from the top of the hill, that's about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Before I could continue, the man let out a loud bark of laughter, shaking his head as he slapped the counter with one palm. "Oh, that's a good one, Sonny," he said. I raised an eyebrow. It honestly hadn't been that funny, but I continued. "Yeah, so I was hoping that you might be able to help point me in the right direction, so I can deliver it and be on my way. It's my last delivery of the night, and I would like to get home." The man seemed to soak up my request and then nodded, holding out a hand for the directions. I handed them to him, glancing out the window as he read. The rain seemed to be letting up, thank God. I turned back as he snapped his fingers. "Oh yes, I know the address. Belongs to a wonderful family that just moved in recently, the Corrigans." He pulled a pen from his pocket and began to write on the paper. "Let me just write you down the directions. I'm sure they're beyond starving and looking forward to eat." I nodded absent-mindedly, already planning in my head how to explain my delay to Rita if she woke up when I got home. Glancing out at the lights of the first houses, a question popped in my head. "Hey, by the way, when did this place get put up? I didn't hear anything about it back my way." The man answered, still bent over. "Oh, not too long ago, really. The developers who set it up already did so with many other rural areas across the country. They're expanding now, and the residents which are moving in, myself included, love these kind of areas. Plenty of beautiful views, fresh air for the children to play in, and..." He paused for a moment before finishing. "Well, to be quite honest, and this is just my opinion, but the local food around here is to die for." For a second, I simply nodded absent-mindedly again. Then, as if on a delayed reaction, the man's words suddenly clicked in my head. With them came a small wave of confusion, and I turned back to stare at the top of his head. What? Aside from the pizza place, a sizzler, and a subpar Italian restaurant, which had somehow remained open despite everything, the nearest restaurant was at least 50 miles away. And there was no way that anybody would describe any of those three places to die for. I don't know, maybe he's just trying to be nice. I pushed it away as he stood up, holding out the paper for me to take back. "Here you go, hopefully it'll be easy for you to follow." Feeling relieved, I reached out and took the directions from him, glancing at them for a moment before sliding them back into my pocket and raising my eyes back to him, my mouth opening to thank him. And that's when I noticed something which unsettled me somewhat. The man was still smiling at me. I hadn't really noticed it at first, but during our entire back and forth, it had not faltered for a second. Even now, the exact same expression adorned his face, the pearly white teeth almost seeming to reflect the overhead lights. Not only that, but his eyes seemed to almost contain the same twinkle they had when he had first seen me, as if he were privy to some sort of hilarious joke that he chose to keep to himself. A small shiver raced up my spine, and feeling more than a bit creeped out, I began moving towards the door, forcing my voice out calmer than I felt. Yeah, thanks a lot, man, this helps. Have a good night. I turned and strode quickly for the exit. And behind me, I heard the man's cheerful voice ring out a final time. You as well. And then I was through the door, jogging back through the rain towards my sab. Opening the door and climbing inside, I quickly shut it behind me and impulsively locked it. For a few moments, I simply sat there trying to make sense of the interaction in my mind. Nothing about it had seemed remotely normal to me. I shivered slightly as I started the car, glancing back at the window as I slid out from beneath the awning. I instantly regretted my decision. I could clearly see the man staring out the window at me. His face was blurred from the rain, but I bet my bottom dollar that he was still smiling. Okay, seriously, what's going on? I know not everybody here will be like him, but if we get any more deliveries out here, I'm avoiding that place like the plague. The one good thing that had come out of the encounter was the directions. As creepy as he had been accurate at least. Less than 10 minutes later, I was pulling up in front of the house. The rain had thankfully stopped, and as I stepped out of the car, the pizzas held in one hand, I inhaled the smell of the wet grass from the lawns. In the distance, I could still hear the thunder rumbling as the storm moved away. For the first time since Tony had called to me, I felt relief and allowed a small smile to cross my face. After all the crap that's happened tonight, all I gotta do is deliver these and I'm home free. Crossing to the path which led up to the house, I allowed myself to glance around, and I paused for a moment. In the driveway of the house sat about the last car that I ever expected to see in a place like this. It was a green Dodge Coronet from the early 70s, the sedan's paint and bodywork looking pristine. Huh, I said, and then I looked to the other side, expecting to see a Mercedes or a Lexus in the driveway next door. To my further surprise, though, I instead saw what appeared to be an early 80s Land Cruiser. Like the Dodge, this too appeared to be in almost showroom condition. Okay, that's something I didn't expect. I would have thought that folks in a place like this would own brand new luxury cars or SUVs, not stuff from 40 or 50 years ago. Go figure. Shaking my head for what felt like the millionth time tonight, I resumed my walk to the front door, climbing the porch steps and reaching out with my free hand for the doorbell. I gave it a press, hearing the chime ring out inside. I stood there for a moment, listening to the distant rumble of thunder and whipping wind, before reaching out and hitting the doorbell again. From somewhere within the house came a woman's voice. "Just a minute." Satisfied that I had gotten a reply, I stepped away from the front door and waited. A moment later, I saw movement behind the frosted glass to the sides of the door. The same voice came from the other side. "Who is it?" I cleared my throat. "Pizza delivery, ma'am. I have your order." In response, I heard the sound of the door being unlocked, and after another moment, it swung open. I found myself facing a woman only a few years older than me. Her mousy brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore a pair of slacks and a button-up shirt. She smiled warmly at me as she spied the pizzas in my hands. "Oh, of course." She noticed my lack of a coat and beckoned to me. "Oh, please come inside out of this horrible weather. You don't need to be getting sick." Smiling gratefully, I nodded, and then wiping my feet on the mat, I stepped inside as she closed the door behind me. The interior hall was warm and inviting, and I felt myself relax as the woman stepped back in front of me. She began to open her mouth to speak, but was interrupted as a man called from somewhere in the back of the house. "Honey, is that the delivery boy?" The woman turned away from me. "Yes, it is, darling." She turned back to me, gesturing to the pizzas in my hand. "My husband will be right out to pay you. Can I take these? Our boys are starving, and I promised them something to eat before they went to bed." According to Tony, I wasn't to let go of the deliveries until I had been handed the money. But since I was already in the house, I didn't see the harm. I handed them to her, and she gave me another smile before turning and heading down the hallway. Left alone, I rubbed my still chilly arms and I glanced around. The hallway was done in a very cozy retro style. Wood paneling covered the walls and a patterned carpet lined the floor. Photos hung from the walls and I stepped forward slightly to examine the closest ones. The first showed the woman beaming and standing next to what had to be her husband, a tall, muscular man in his early 40s, who smiled as well. Two small tow-headed boys stood in front of them, also smiling at the camera. The picture caused me to crack another smile, seeing the happy family and feeling a pang of nostalgia for the days that I posed for photos like that with my parents. I looked at the next one. The four were standing on what looked to be a beach of some sort, dressed in swim trunks. Turning my head slightly, I looked at the third photo. I just had begun to take in the fact that we were standing in front of a house when something clicked in my head. I leaned back, looking at that first picture again and then the second, and finally the third. For a moment, what I was seeing didn't connect in my mind. I looked again at the three photos and felt a huge chill pass through me. All four of them wore the same smile in each photo. I don't mean that they were similar, they were the exact same smiles, all identical. Something that was impossible. No one person can perfectly replicate the same smile or expression twice, whether it be due to face muscles or outside elements, let alone four. What the heck? I whispered, taking a step back and feeling as though I had been drenched with ice water. My mind whirred and I felt my heart begin to thump in my chest. Okay, just calm down, Hal, I thought. Get a hold of yourself, you're overthinking things. They don't all have the same smile in every single picture. You've had a long night, you're tired. Just get this over with and go home. I almost began to believe it, feeling myself begin to relax, until the sound came from behind me, in the den. I hadn't glanced into it when I had entered, having been too focused on the woman at the time. But as I slowly turned towards the source of the noise, my eyes slid over everything, my mind slowly following behind. I saw the wallpaper looking brand new but done in a pattern that looked long out of fashion. I saw the circular couch and chairs all done in muted reds and greens, or in the case of one chair, plaid. I saw the green carpet, which I numbly realized was a shag style I hadn't seen since my uncle had ripped up his in the early 2000s. I saw the weirdly shaped lamps and tables, and then my eyes landed on the far side of the room. The two boys that I had seen in the pictures sat on the floor in front of a TV. Both faced away from me and I could only see the backs of their heads as they played video games. And since every small kid, including my own cousins, play games nowadays, it wouldn't have been what fixed my attention, had it not been for two details. The first was that they weren't sitting in front of a flat-screen TV. Instead, they sat in front of a huge CRT set, one which was clad in wood paneling, looking like something out of an old Montgomery Ward catalog. The second was that they weren't playing a PlayStation, a Nintendo, or Xbox. I couldn't see the console from where I stood, but I didn't need to. I could see the screen and hear the sounds drifting out from the speakers. They were playing an Atari. In any other situation, it wouldn't have been something that I would have batted an eye at. In fact, I would have loved seeing kids playing retro games, as I had grown up with them myself. But between the identical smiles in the photographs, once my mind was futilely still trying to rationalize the brand new 70s decor, and then this, it felt like the cherry on the proverbial creepy sundae. Just like with the guy in the gas station, nothing about this place felt right. Every alarm bell was ringing in my head. And that's when the two boys turned to look at me. Whether they had sensed my gaze or not, I don't know. All I know is that I had to force down a scream at their expressions. Both of them stared at me with identical smiles. Smiles which mirrored those they had worn in the pictures that I had gazed at. Something clicked inside of me and I suddenly realized why the gas station attendant had creeped me out. It hadn't just been the fact that he never stopped smiling. It was that the smile didn't seem genuine, like they were more a painted-on facade designed to lull someone into a false sense of security. All of this flashed through my mind as they continued to stare at me. Swallowing a bit, I feebly attempted to plaster a smile of my own on my face and gently raised a hand to wave at them. Neither one of them moved, only continued to stare at me. All the hair on my body was standing on end, and I took a step back. Okay, you know what? Screw this. I'll eat the cost that Tony will saddle me with. It's time to get out of here. Feeling vulnerable, taking my eyes off the two boys, I turned to head for the front door, only to come face to face with two grinning visages. Just like with the gas station, I hadn't heard the woman come back down the hallway. She stood almost directly in front of me, her husband by her side. With another shiver, I realized he was almost a half-foot taller than me, something that, at 6'2", I wasn't used to it. Reflexively, I took a step backwards, trying to put space between myself and them. For a moment, there was silence, and then the man spoke. "You'll have to forgive me, young man. I was busy putting away leftovers in the freezer, and my wife here always nags me about being rude." They both let out laughs that, like their smiles, were about as real as a clown's face paint. For a moment, I wasn't able to say anything until my mind began screaming at me. "Play along with it. If they don't realize you're onto them, you might be able to leave." I took another almost imperceptible step back and forced myself to speak in a voice that was the antithesis of what I felt. "Oh, it's quite all right, sir. Believe me, my fiancé nags me about the same thing." Both of them chuckled again, and I felt another shiver at the sound. "Well, I'm glad I'm not the only one with that issue." He reached into his pocket and withdrew his wallet. "Now, how much do I owe you?" he asked. $24.76, sir, I managed out. He pulled the money out, counting for a second before holding it out to me. "Here you are, son, plus a tip for the trouble of coming out so late." Feeling as though I were inches away from escape, I forced a smile on my lips and reached out, grabbing the money that he offered, risking a glance up at their faces as I did. And I froze. I didn't mean that I froze in fear or indecision. As soon as my eyes met theirs, it felt much like the way someone who's been hypnotized must feel. Everything drifted away and I was vaguely aware of my arms lowering at my sides. My vision blurred and the sounds began to feel as though I were hearing them down a long tunnel. Part of my mind attempted to scream at me, but I was unable to react to it. I simply stood there, almost feeling as if I had stepped out of space and time. Very faintly, I heard the sound of a boy's voice calling out, "Mom, we're hungry. Is it time to eat yet?" After a moment, a woman's voice answered, sounding just as distant as the boy's had. "Yes, dear, it's time." For some reason, I'll never be able to understand why, that one sentence snapped me back to my senses. I came to, flying forward from the dark tunnel that I had drifted into, finding myself back in the hallway. As soon as I did, I had to clamp my jaw shut to keep from screaming my lungs out. All four of them stood in front of me less than 2 feet away. All four still wore the same smiles as before, with one horrifying difference, one that I've seen in my nightmares ever since. Their heads were tilted down slightly and their smiles no longer seemed fake and inviting. They now looked genuine, and so very hungry. As soon as the realization hit me, I was a blur of motion, twisting around and dashing for the front door. Behind me, I felt more than heard the family recoil in surprise. They hadn't expected me to snap out of my trance. I knew they would regain their composure in seconds, but I was already tearing open the front door. Dashing outside and slamming it closed behind me, I took a huge, bounding step and launched myself off the porch, beginning to dash for my car. But I had taken less than 3 steps when I froze again. My blood froze like ice in my veins and I couldn't help but let out a gasp. I was no longer alone on the street. Everyone was outside. Men, women, children, and teenagers. All of them stood in the yellow glow spilling out of their open doorways. Some were only a few steps outside, while others were closer to the street. But they all wore the same horrific expression on their faces, the same hungry smiles as the family inside. Finding my feet again, I raced for my sob. Behind me, I heard the sound of the front door opening, but I didn't dare spare a glance back. I knew that if I did, I would fall under the same spell that I had before, and this time I wouldn't come out of it. I didn't look at anyone, merely kept my gaze fixated on my car. Mercifully, I had unlocked it, and I yanked the driver's door open, launching myself into the seat and slamming it behind me. Fumbling with the keys, I jammed them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I spared a glance as I yanked the shifter into first gear. I caught a glimpse of everybody advancing on my car, their smiles still there, but now their eyes seemed to hold a mixture of anger and desperation. I floored it. The sound of the screeching tires filled my ears. I shot forward, the car launching down the street. I heard something slam into the back of the car and felt the rear end fishtail slightly. Fighting for control, I shifted into third gear and kept my foot hard down. The sob straightened out and I glanced down at the speedometer, seeing that I was already doing 45. I took the first left, trying as hard as I could to recall the layout that I had had to navigate to reach my destination. I'm not getting lost in this suburbia. Here. As I took another left, I chanced to look in the rearview mirror, and this time I finally did scream. More and more people were emptying out of their houses, the entire subdivision by the look of things. That wasn't what had caused me to scream though. It was the fact that they were running after me, and they were keeping up. I shot another look down at my speedometer. I was doing almost 50 miles an hour. "That's impossible," I screamed. But as I took another left, finally seeing the main road, I spied an 8-year-old girl, her hair done up in pigtails and her face like the others, a hungry, animalistic grin, running after my car and almost matching its pace. On all fours. I slammed the car into fourth gear as the speedometer climbed towards 70, and finally the people began to fall away behind me. Still, I kept my foot down hard, the car's engine screaming in the cabin as the gas station approached on my right. I cast a look over it as I flew past. The gas station attendant stood at the side of the road. He didn't attempt to block my path, instead simply watched me fly past him. I only had a moment to notice one detail. Unlike the others, he no longer held the grin on his face. Instead, like a child's Halloween mask, it was expressionless. And that's when one final detail that I had overlooked the entire time slammed into me like a train. None of them had ever blinked a single time. That horrific night was almost 2 weeks ago now. I never let up on the gas until I made it back to town, glancing every 2 seconds into the rearview mirror to make sure that I was not being followed. I raced straight to the sheriff's department, almost taking out a row of parking meters as I screeched to a halt in front of it. I must have looked like a lunatic with how I burst in there, ranting and raving. The sheriff and his deputies were understandably dubious as I recounted my experience, but once I managed to produce the directions I had thankfully held onto, he sent a few of them out in their cruisers to investigate with it. They came back an hour later with confused expressions. The words that one of them said made my mouth drop open. "Sheriff, all we found is a dead-end road. There's nothing out there." The worst part about everything isn't that nobody believed me. As much as they try to pretend otherwise, I know they do to a certain degree for 2 reasons, both evidence of what I had said. The first was the money. I had never let go of it after I had grabbed it, keeping it balled up in my fist until I had gotten in the car and snatched for the keys. All of it looked brand new with one exception. The newest date of any of the bills was 1984. The second was these scratches on the back quarter panel of my Saab. Scratches that more resembled claw marks than human hands. The worst part was they knew nobody else would believe it. I guess that's why they quietly put up the cement barriers on that stretch of road a week and a half later, to keep others from driving down there, to keep anybody else from falling prey to whoever or whatever those things are. I know they're still there though. A day before the barricades went up, I ventured out onto that road again. Don't ask me why, not even I fully understand. I prayed that I would see what the deputies had, simply a dead-end road. But instead, I found myself staring at that same 3-way intersection, the same sign, Sycamore Street. I quit my job working at the pizza place the very next day. Tony gave me crap for it for not bringing the money in. I simply told him to call the sheriff. I'm trying currently to find some kind of remote job. Rita, God bless her, has been helping me. I should have an interview coming up in a few days. If it weren't for the fact that my mother lives here and refuses to leave the house that my dad built for her, I would have simply packed our things up and left. But we don't seem to be in any danger here in town, so we've stayed, for now at least. And that brings me to why I'm posting this here. The first is to simply let it out of my head. I've had horrible nightmares almost every night since. Nightmares about what might have happened if I hadn't snapped out of that trance. About what they would have done to me. I frankly don't care if you believe me or not. I simply hope this might be a form of catharsis. Something that may stop me from waking my fiancé up with my screams. But I have another reason. And regardless of whether you believe me, I beg you, please, if nothing else, at least heed this warning. Because I can't stop thinking about something that the man in the gas station, or whatever he had truly been, said to me. The developers who set it up already did so with many other rural areas across the country. They're expanding now. That sentence and its implications scare me almost more than anything else. So please, if you ever find yourself out in the middle of nowhere and you stumble across a seemingly secluded community or suburb, one that you never heard about being built, filled with things that make it seem like a place out of time, don't investigate it. Turn around and drive as fast away from it as you can, and don't look back. Because things dwell in them waiting for, or sometimes luring people into them. Much the way an anglerfish uses the light on its head to lure prey close enough to devour. And unlike me, you may not make it out. When I first took the job with RRD Deliveries in Addison County, Vermont, I thought it would be simple. Drive the company van, drop off packages, and enjoy the scenery. Collect a paycheck. I had moved from Philadelphia after my divorce, looking for peace and quiet and maybe some time to work on the book that I had always been threatening to write for years. What I found instead was a job with a very strict, non-negotiable set of rules. This is what they were. Rule number 1. Never enter a customer's home regardless of invitation or weather conditions. Rule number 2. If a delivery address has a red flag on the mailbox, leave the package at the end of the driveway. Do not approach the house. Rule number 3. Finish all deliveries before sunset. If you cannot complete your delivery, return the remaining packages to the depot. Never deliver after dark. Rule number 4. If you see a deer carcass on the road with its head missing, turn around immediately and find another route. Rule number 5. Never accept food or drink from customers, no matter how harmless it may seem. Rule number 6. If a child answers the door alone, do not hand over the package. Leave immediately and report the address to dispatch. Rule number 7. If you hear a car horn honking repeatedly on a deserted road, do not stop to investigate. Drive away as quickly as possible. I thought at first that they were bizarre local superstitions or overblown responses to isolated incidents. It took me less than a week to discover how wrong I was. My third day on the job, I had a delivery for a farmhouse about 20 minutes outside of town, tucked away at the end of a winding dirt road. It was early March and a late season snow had made the roads treacherous. The house belonged to an elderly woman named Verna Caldwell, according to my notes. I pulled into the driveway, noticing the lack of tire tracks or footprints in the snow. The house itself was a sprawling Victorian, once grand but now showing signs of neglect. Peeling paint, missing shingles, windows shrouded in yellowing lace curtains. The package was heavy, some kind of medical equipment according to the labeling. I trudged through ankle-deep snow to the front porch and I rang the bell. After a full minute, the door creaked open to reveal a tiny woman with snow-white hair and eyes so pale blue that they were almost transparent. She wore a faded floral dress, despite the biting cold. "Mrs. Caldwell," I asked, forcing a smile through my teeth. "I have a package for you." She squinted at me and then at the box in my hands. "Oh, yes, my medicine. Please, young man, bring it inside. These old bones can't lift such things anymore." I hesitated, remembering rule number 1, but the snow was falling harder now and the woman looked so frail. What harm could it do? "Of course," I said, following her into a dim hallway that smelled of mothballs and something sickly sweet underneath. The interior of the house was cluttered with decades of accumulated possessions. Stacks of yellowed newspapers, porcelain figurines crowded on every surface, framed photographs covering the walls. But what struck me most was the temperature. Despite the blizzard outside, the house was stiflingly hot. "Oh, just through here," Mrs. Caldwell said, leading me toward what I assumed was the living room. "You can set it down near my chair." I followed, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots. As we passed a partially open door, I glanced inside and froze. The room was a bedroom, dimly lit by a single lamp. On the bed lay what I first thought was a mannequin, a life-size doll dressed in an old-fashioned suit. But mannequins don't have skin that sags around the jaw, or wisps of real hair carefully combed across a balding scalp. It was a man, elderly and impossibly thin, lying perfectly still on top of the covers. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Mrs. Caldwell," I said, my voice catching. "Is that man all right?" She turned, her pale eyes narrowing. "Oh, my Herbert is fine. He's resting. He doesn't like to be disturbed." I stepped closer to the doorway, unable to help myself. The man hadn't blinked one time since I had noticed him. His chest didn't appear to be moving. "Ma'am, I think you might need medical attention." Her expression hardened. "I told you he's resting. He gets like this sometimes. Now come along, the living room is just ahead." Something was very wrong. I set the package down in the hallway, backing toward the front door. "Actually, I just remembered that I'm not supposed to come inside customers' homes. Company policy. I'll leave this here for you." Her face changed then, the grandmotherly facade dropping away. "You shouldn't have looked in that room, boy." Her voice had dropped an octave, suddenly stronger. "Herbert doesn't like strangers seeing him like this." I was at the door now, fumbling for the knob. "I'm sorry to have disturbed you. Have a good day, Mrs. Caldwell." She moved with a surprising speed for somebody her age, positioning herself between me and the door. "But you've only just arrived. Herbert would love to meet you properly. He so rarely gets visitors these days." Behind me, I heard a door creak. Turning, I saw the bedroom door opening wider, though no one was visibly pushing it. "I really have to go," I insisted, finally managing to open the front door. "Other deliveries, you know." Mrs. Caldwell's hand shot out, gripping my wrist with shocking strength. "Don't be rude, young man. It's only a little visit. Herbert needs his medicine, you see, and you look so healthy." I yanked my arm free and stumbled backward onto the porch. Without looking back, I ran to my van, slipping twice in the snow. As I fumbled with my keys, I glanced at the house. Mrs. Caldwell stood in the doorway watching me. Behind her, a tall, skeletal figure appeared, a man in an outdated suit, moving in jerky, unnatural motions. His head tilted at an impossible angle, but his eyes were fixed directly on me. I've never started a vehicle so quickly in my life. As I peeled out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse in my rearview mirror. both figures standing in the snow perfectly still, watching my retreat. And back at the depot, I reported what I had seen to my boss. His reaction surprised me. No shock, no disbelief, just a wary nod. Rule number 1, he said quietly. Never enter a customer's home. Now you understand it. He made a note in his ledger and then picked up the phone and made a call that I couldn't quite hear. The next day, I learned that the sheriff had visited the Caldwell house and found it empty. No elderly woman, no man in a suit, not even furniture. According to property records, the house has been abandoned for nearly a decade after an elderly couple had died there, Herbert and Verna Caldwell. The package which I had left in the hallway was never recovered. As you could imagine, I was a lot more careful after the Caldwell incident, following the rules with religious devotion. But I was still curious about where they came from. Why were they so specific? My boss was pretty tight-lipped, but Mara, the dispatcher who had worked at R&R for almost 15 years, was more forthcoming. Oh yeah, that rule about the red flags. That started with Orrin Peckley, back in 2012. She told me over coffee one morning. He was one of our best drivers. Former military, punctual, good with the customers. According to Mara, Orrin had been delivering to a remote property on the outskirts of town, marked by a red flag on the mailbox. It was a large property, several acres of dense woodland, surrounding a modest farmhouse. The owner was somewhat infamous in the area, a recluse who had moved from California a few years prior, rumored to have been involved in some kind of cult activity on the West Coast. Despite explicit instructions to leave all packages at the end of the driveway, Orrin had decided to save the customer a long walk in the rain and delivered a package directly to the front door. No one knows exactly what Orrin saw at that house. He returned to the depot hours later than scheduled, visibly shaken, his clothes soaked with what he claimed was only rainwater, though Mara had her doubts. He quit the next day, packed up his apartment, and moved away without leaving a forwarding address. 3 days later, police responded to complaints about a foul odor coming from Weather's property, the place where Orrin had delivered the package. They found Weather dead in what appeared to be some kind of ceremonial space in his basement, a concrete room with unusual stains on the floors and walls covered in photographs. Hundreds of photographs, all showing people who seemed unaware that they were being photographed, people at grocery stores walking their dogs, sitting in cars, and dozens of photos of R&R delivery drivers, including Orrin, going about their routes over the previous months. The official cause of Weather's death was listed as suicide, but the responding officers had nightmares for weeks after. Several of them, retired earlier, transferred to different departments, and the red flag that had once marked Weather's mailbox was added to R&R's list of warning signs. I didn't fully believe Mara's story until a month into my employment, when I pulled up to a remote cabin and saw a freshly painted red flag attached to the mailbox. Following protocol, I left the package, a heavy box from a hunting supply company, at the end of the long driveway, took my confirmation photo and prepared to leave. As I was getting back into the van, I noticed movement at the tree line. A man stood there, partially obscured by pines, watching me. He was tall, dressed in camouflage, his face obscured by what looked like a hunting mask. In his hands was what appeared to be a high-powered rifle. I pretended not to notice him, calmly getting into my van and driving away. In my mirror, I saw him emerge from the woods, retrieve the package, and then stand in the middle of the road, watching my vehicle until I turned a corner and lost sight of him. When I described the man to my boss later, he nodded grimly and made another note in his ledger. The next day, the address was removed from our delivery routes without explanation. The package that had been scheduled for delivery there was also gone, though I had never seen it returned. And 2 weeks later, I read in the local paper about a man arrested after police found evidence connecting him to 3 missing hikers from the previous year. He lived at the address with the red flag. Vermont winters mean early sunsets, sometimes as early as 4 p.m. during December and January. This makes the no deliveries after dark rule very challenging, especially during the holiday rush when our delivery load triples. Most of the time I manage to finish my routes with a daylight to spare. But one Friday in late December, a morning snowstorm had delayed my start, and a broken chain on my snow tire had cost me another hour. By 3:30, I still had 4 deliveries left and the sun was already dipping toward the Green Mountains. I called my boss for instructions. "Bring them back," he said without hesitation. "We'll deliver them tomorrow." "But one of them is marked urgent," I protested, checking the label on a small package addressed to a property along Route 125. "Medical supplies, and it's only a 10-minute drive from here." There was silence on the line and then a heavy sigh. "You know the rule exists for a reason." "I know, but it's barely 3:30. If I go straight there, I can make it before sunset." More silence. "Fine, 1 delivery. The Route 125 address only, and then you come straight back to the depot. The other packages can wait until tomorrow." I agreed and hung up, already turning the van toward Route 125. The address belonged to a small cabin set back from the road, accessible by a narrow dirt driveway currently covered in several inches of snow. I made it to the property at 3:45 p.m. The sun was lower now, painting the snow-covered landscape in deep shades of orange and purple. I calculated that I had another 15 minutes of daylight left, plenty of time to drop off the package and get back on the main road. The cabin appeared empty at first glance. No lights, no smoke from the chimney, no car in the driveway. I approached the front door, package in hand, and knocked firmly. No response. Protocol for undeliverable packages was to leave a notice and bring the package back to the depot for the customer to pick up or to reschedule delivery. But given the urgent medical supplies label in the remote location, I decided to try the side of the house, where I spotted what looked like a back entrance. As I rounded the corner, I noticed that a window was partially open despite the cold. Through it, I could hear what sounded like a radio or a television playing softly. "Hello," I called out. "R&R Deliveries. I have a package for, Lawrence Deveray." The sound from inside abruptly stopped. I heard movement, a shuffling sound like something heavy being dragged across the floor. "Mr. Deveray, I have your medical supplies." A voice responded so quiet that I had to strain to hear it. "Leave it by the door." The voice sounded weak, perhaps elderly. Concerned, I moved closer to the window. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need help?" "No!" The sudden volume made me jump. "I'm fine. Leave the package and go, please." Something in his tone, a kind of desperate urgency, made me uneasy. I placed the package by the back door as requested. "Is there somebody that I can call for you, Mr. Deveray?" Silence, and then the shuffling sound again, closer now. The back door opened just a crack, darkness visible in the gap. I couldn't see who was on the other side. "You need to leave now. It's getting dark," the voice said. I glanced at the horizon. The sun was just disappearing behind the mountains. "Right, yes, I'll be going. Have a good evening." As I turned to leave, a hand shot up from the gap in the door and grabbed the package. Not an elderly hand, but a young and strong one, and it was covered in what looked like dark stains. I quickened my pace back to the van, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. As I was unlocking the door, movement in my peripheral vision caught my attention. At the edge of the woods surrounding the property, silhouetted against the darkening sky, stood 3 figures. They were too far away to make out clearly, but their proportions seemed wrong somehow. Too tall and too thin, standing too still to be casual observers. I got in the van and started the engine. My headlights illuminated the front of the cabin briefly, revealing something that I hadn't noticed before. The front door, which I thought was dark wood, was actually stained with what looked like dried blood, a large splatter pattern extending outward from around the handle. I threw the van into reverse and peeled out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I could see the 3 figures now moving toward the cabin with an odd, synchronized gait. The following morning, I asked my boss about Lawrence Deveray. His expression darkened. What about him? I delivered a package to him Friday just before sunset. He seemed not well. My boss closed the office door and lowered his voice. Alright, listen carefully. There is no Lawrence Deveray. That cabin has been a problem for us for years. Different names, different excuses for deliveries, but always the same pattern. Urgent packages, requested delivery times right before sunset. I don't understand. 3 drivers before you have made after-dark deliveries to that address. 1 disappeared entirely. The other 2 came back, changed. They quit suddenly and moved away. But before they left, they tried to convince other drivers to make deliveries to that same address. So who was I delivering to? He shook his head. I don't know, but I do know this. That address is now blacklisted, and you're lucky that you left when you did. Vermont's rural roads are often decorated with unfortunate wildlife casualties, especially during hunting season. After 6 months on the job, I had become desensitized to the occasional dead raccoon or squirrel. Even deer weren't uncommon, though most hunters would take their prize rather than leave it on the asphalt. So when I came across a headless deer carcass blocking the narrow dirt road leading to the Ballman property, my first thought wasn't about rule number 4. I assumed it was a hunter's kill that had been partially claimed and then abandoned for whatever reason. Unpleasant but not alarming. I was about to drive around it when I remembered the rule. It seemed absurd. I mean, what difference did it make if the deer was missing its head? But after my experiences with the other rules, I wasn't taking chances. I put the van in reverse and began looking for an alternate route to the Ballman residence. My GPS showed a longer way that would add about 20 minutes to my drive. Annoying but manageable. As I turned the van around, I noticed something odd about the deer carcass that had escaped my initial observation. There was almost no blood on the road. A recently killed deer, especially one that had been decapitated, should have left a substantial puddle of blood. This one looked as if it had been carefully drained first, and then deliberately placed in the center of the road. I took the alternate route, checking my mirrors frequently to make sure that I was not being followed. The Ballman property was located in one of the most remote areas on my way, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and a small lake on the 4th. The only access was via the narrow dirt road that I had abandoned, or the longer route that I was currently taking. When I finally arrived, I was met by Mrs. Ballman, a woman in her mid-60s with sharp features and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had spent her life in rural isolation. She seemed surprised to see me. "Oh, you're earlier than expected," she remarked, signing for her package. "Most drivers don't make it here until much later." "Yeah, there was a blockage on the main road, a deer carcass. I had to take the long way around." Her expression changed instantly, eyes widening slightly. "A deer? Missing its head by any chance?" I nodded, suddenly uneasy. "Well, yes, actually. How did you know?" She glanced toward the woods and then lowered her voice. "You were right to turn around. That's their sign." "Their sign? Whose sign?" "The Willard family," she replied, as if that explained everything. "They live deeper in the forest where no roads go. They have for generations, and they don't like visitors, and they have, well, unique ways of marking their territory." I had never heard of the Willards, but something about the way she said the name made my skin crawl. "Well, are they hunters?" "Of a sort." She clutched the package to her chest, already retreating into her house. "They're selective about their prey. Stay on the main roads, young man, and if you ever see another sign like that, do what you did today. Turn around and don't come back another way. Just skip the delivery entirely." "What happens if you ignore the sign?" I asked, unable to help myself. She was almost inside now, the door half closed between us. "Ask your boss about the guy named Jackson. He was a driver here back in '97. He ignored the signs." And with that, she shut the door firmly. When I returned to the depot, I did ask my boss about Jackson. His normally ruddy complexion paled though. "Who told you about that?" he demanded. "Mrs. Bauman said that he was a driver who ignored some kind of warning sign from a family called the Willards." My boss's hand went to a small scar on his neck, a detail that I had noticed before but never questioned. "Yeah, Jack was my friend. We had started at R&R the same year. He was a good driver, but dang, he was stubborn. Thought that all the rules were just old-timer superstitions." According to my boss, Jackson had encountered a headless deer on a remote road, but continued anyway. His van was found there 3 days later, abandoned about 5 miles from where he should have been. The keys were still in the ignition and the package is still in the back. Of Jackson himself, they found nothing but his R&R cap, covered in blood that DNA testing confirmed was his. "Yeah, the official report blamed it on a bear attack," my boss said bitterly. "But bears don't string up a man from a tree and drain him like a deer. Bears don't take trophies." He refused to elaborate further. But the next morning, I found a sealed envelope in my locker containing a single newspaper clipping from 1997. It detailed his disappearance and the subsequent search. What my boss hadn't mentioned was that 3 members of the search party had also disappeared. They were found a week later at their campsite, their tent shredded, and their bodies arranged in what the article described as a ritualistic display. All 3 were missing their heads. The hardest rules to follow are the ones that require you to be impolite. In rural Vermont, hospitality is practically a religion. Refusing an offered cookie or a cup of coffee makes you feel like it's a personal insult. But rule number 5 was clear, and after what I had seen and heard, I wasn't taking any chances. Most customers understood a polite, "Hey, no thank you, I'm good," without taking offense. Some even seemed to expect it, nodding slightly as if I had passed some kind of test. But this one particular delivery was very different. Mrs. Hargrove lived alone in a charming cottage just outside of Bristol, surrounded by vibrant flower gardens even in the depths of winter, thanks to a surprisingly high-tech greenhouse attached to the south side of her home. She was in her 70s, petite and rosy-cheeked, the very picture of a storybook grandmother. I delivered to her often. She was an avid online shopper, ordering everything from books to gardening supplies to specialty foods from around the world. Each time I arrived, she would greet me with a smile and an offer of freshly baked goods or herbal tea from my own garden. Each time I politely declined, and each time, her smile would falter just slightly before she recovered her cheerful demeanor. After several months of this routine, I had almost forgotten she was the exception to the typically understanding Vermonters. And then came the day of the blizzard. A February nor'easter that dropped 2 feet of snow in a matter of hours. Most deliveries had been suspended, but I had already been out of my way when the storm had intensified. My boss radioed in, instructing me to find somewhere safe to wait it out rather than risk the increasingly treacherous roads back to the depot. As luck would have it, I was less than a mile from Mrs. Hargrove's cottage, with a package for her in the back of my van. I figured that I could deliver it, and then asked to use her phone to call my boss for further instructions. She welcomed me with even more enthusiasm than usual, ushering me into her warm kitchen as I stamped snow from my boots. "Oh my goodness, you shouldn't be out in this weather," she clucked, taking the package from my hands. "You'll catch your death. Here, let me make you some tea to warm up." Before I could refuse, she was already filling an antique copper kettle. The kitchen was cozy and fragrant, herbs hanging in bunches from the ceiling beams, shelves lined with jars of dried flowers and leaves, all meticulously labeled in an elegant script. "Mrs. Hargrove, I hate to impose, but could I use your phone? I need to check in with the boss." "Of course, my dear, it's in the hallway. But first, you really must get warm. I insist." She placed a steaming mug in front of me, an aromatic herbal tea the color of honey, and turned to pull a tray of cookies from the oven. They were simple sugar cookies, golden brown and perfectly shaped. "My special recipe," she said, placing two on a small plate beside my mug. "Guaranteed to warm you from the inside out." I was cold and the tea smelled amazing. After months of deliveries in all weather, was I really still adhering to a rule that was probably based on some strange incident years ago? Surely a cookie and some tea from a sweet old lady weren't going to hurt me. My hand was halfway to the mug when I noticed something odd about the tea. Tiny particles that hadn't fully dissolved, glittering like mica at the bottom of the cup. And the cookies, perfect as they appeared, had an unusual sheen to them, almost as if they had been varnished rather than simply baked. "Is something wrong, dear?" she said, watching me intently. Her usual grandmotherly smile was still in place, but her eyes were sharp and focused. I hadn't noticed before how glacier blue they were, almost unnaturally bright against her pale skin. "No, nothing," I said quickly. "Actually, I should use the phone first. My boss will be worried." A flicker of something, disappointment to irritation, crossed her face, but she nodded toward the hallway. "Oh, of course, just through there." As I stood, I pretended to stumble slightly, knocking into the table. My arm brushed against the mug, tipping it over. Tea spilled across the polished wood. "Oh gosh, I'm sorry," I exclaimed, already reaching for a napkin. "Oh, don't worry about it, I'll clean it up. You make your call." In the hallway, I found the phone and I dialed the depot. As I waited for someone to answer, my gaze drifted to the photographs arranged on the wall. Family portraits, I assumed at first. Maybe Mrs. Hargrove with various people, mostly men of different ages. But as I looked closer, I realized the men all had that same vacant expression, the same slightly unfocused gaze. And in each photo, she appeared exactly as she did now, not a day older or younger, her appearance unchanged across what must have been decades. Next to the phone was a small table with a drawer slightly ajar. Inside, I glimpsed what looked like prescription bottles. Curiosity got the better of me and I quietly slid the drawer open further. At least a dozen orange prescription bottles were inside, all with different men's names on the labels. The most recent, dated just 3 months earlier, was prescribed to Thomas Walden. The medication name was one that I didn't recognize, but the description on the side of the bottle made my blood run cold. For maintenance of induced comatose state, administered as directed by neurological specialist only. I heard a noise behind me and I turned to find Mrs. Hargrove standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. The facade had vanished entirely now. Her expression was calculating and cold. "Find what you're looking for?" she asked, her voice no longer warm and quavering, but clear and sharp. I was waiting for somebody to pick up," I stammered, closing the door quickly. "Oh, no one's going to answer," she said, taking a step toward me. "The lines are down because of the storm. You'll have to stay until it passes." She was blocking the path to the front door. Behind her, the kitchen and the back door suddenly seemed very far away. "That's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The van has a radio. I can get back to it now that the snow has let up a bit." It was a lie. The storm was still raging outside, but I needed to get out of this house. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she said, taking another step closer. "You can't drive in this, and besides, I've been so looking forward to having company." Her hand slipped into the pocket of her apron, emerging with what looked like a small pepper grinder. But instead of peppercorns, I glimpsed something green and crystalline inside. "What's in the tea, Mrs. Hargrove?" I asked, backing up until I hit the wall. Her smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just herbs from my garden. Special ones that help my guests relax. Stay. They all do in the end." In a flash of clarity, I realized what the photographs on the wall really were. Not family, but a collection. Trophies. I lunged past her, catching her by surprise. She grabbed for my arm but missed, her nails scraping along my jacket. I ran through the kitchen and out the back door into the blinding snow. The van was where I had left it, already covered in several inches of fresh powder. I brushed off the driver's side window just enough to see through, and then I climbed in and started the engine. The tires spun in the snow before finally catching. As I pulled away, I saw Mabel stood in the middle of the road watching me go, that pepper grinder still clutched in one hand. She raised the other hand in what almost looked like a wave, but her expression remained cold and calculating, planning. I reported the incident to my boss as soon as I made it back to the depot the next day. He listened without interruption, his expression grim but unsurprised. "Yeah, Mrs. Hargrove has been on our watch list for years," he admitted, "but we've never had enough evidence to do anything about it. 3 of her companions have died in the past decade, all ruled natural causes or accidents. And what about the prescription bottles? The one for Thomas Walden was recent." My boss made a note. "Well, I'll pass it along to the sheriff. He's been trying to build a case against her for years." A week later, police executed a search warrant on Miss Hargrove's cottage. They found an elaborate laboratory in her greenhouse, where she was cultivating various plants with sedative and hallucinogenic properties. In a hidden cellar accessible only through a trapdoor in her pantry, they found Mr. Weldon alive, but in a drug-induced catatonic state. Further investigation revealed that he had been missing for over 3 months. Mrs. Hargrove was arrested and charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and attempted murder. During the investigation, authorities connected her to at least 5 other missing persons cases dating back to the 1980s. And the cottage was condemned and eventually demolished, and in its foundation they found human remains, fragmented bones that forensic analysis determined belonged to at least 7 different individuals. Rule number 6 seemed straightforward enough, a basic safety protocol to prevent packages from being lost or misdelivered. At least that's what I assumed until a delivery changed my perspective entirely. The Fletchers lived in a modern, well-maintained home on the outskirts of town. Nothing about the property set off warning bells, no red flags on the mailbox, no unusual modifications to the home. Just a typical upper-middle-class residence with a neatly mowed lawn and a late-model SUV in the driveway. The package was small but required a signature addressed to a Mrs. Fletcher. I rang the doorbell and waited, a clipboard in hand. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a girl of about 8 or 9, with dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail and serious eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Hello," she said with perfect politeness. "Can I help you?" I smiled automatically. "Hi there, I have a package for Marion Fletcher. Is your mom or dad home?" The girl didn't answer my question directly. "I can sign for it," she said, reaching for the clipboard. "Mom asked me to watch for the delivery." Rule number 6 flashed into my mind. "I'm sorry, but I need an adult signature for the package. Are your parents home?" Something flickered across the girl's face. Annoyance, perhaps, or something harder to define. "Mom's resting, she's not feeling well, but she told me to get her package when it arrived." I hesitated. Again, the girl seemed mature for her age, and this was hardly a dangerous neighborhood. But rules were rules, and after my previous experiences, I wasn't taking any chances. "I'm sorry, I'll have to come back when your mom is available. I can leave a notice and she can—" "No," the girl interrupted, her voice suddenly sharper. "You need to give me the package now. Mom needs what's inside." The change in her tone made me step back. "Is your mom okay? Does she need medical attention or any help?" The girl's expression shifted again, softening into something more vulnerable. "Please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's her medicine. She really needs it. She's in a lot of pain." My resolve wavered. If the package contained medication, withholding it seemed cruel. I glanced at the label again. There was nothing indicating that it was from a pharmacy or a medical supplier. It had been sent from an individual, not a company. "What kind of medicine is it?" I asked, stalling while I tried to decide what to do. The girl's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't know exactly. Something for her condition." "And what condition is that?" A flash of anger crossed her face before she composed herself. "I'm not supposed to talk about it. Please, just give me the package." Something felt wrong about this entire interaction. The girl's demeanor kept shifting between mature politeness and something more demanding, almost adult in its intensity. "I'll tell you what," I said, stepping back toward my van. "I'll call my dispatcher and see if they can reach your mom by phone to authorize leaving the package with you. How does that sound?" The girl's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a surprising strength. "No, don't call anyone, just leave it with me, nobody needs to know." I pulled my arm free, genuinely unsettled now. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. I'll come back tomorrow." As I turned to leave, the girl called after me, but her voice sounded suddenly off. "She won't let you leave, you know. Not now that you've seen me." I spun around. The girl stood in the driveway, her posture changed. She stood straighter, her head tilted at an odd angle, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that was decidedly not childlike. "Who are you talking about?" I asked, already backing away toward my van. "Mother," the girl replied. "She collects things, pretty things. She keeps them in the basement, and she'll want to keep you too." From inside the house came a thudding sound like something heavy falling, or something heavy moving. The girl smiled, revealing teeth too sharp and numerous. "Too late," she sing-songed. "She's coming." I didn't wait to see who or what mother might be. I ran to my van, threw the package onto the passenger seat, and peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind my tires. Looking back, I saw the girl still standing there watching me go, and behind her a tall and possibly thin silhouette appeared, one hand coming to rest on the girl's shoulder in a gesture that seemed protective, like a parent. When I reported the incident to my boss, he immediately called up the sheriff's department. What they found at the Fletcher house has never fully been released to the public. The official statement only mentioned that Marion Fletcher had been taken into custody on charges of child endangerment and that her daughter had been placed in protective custody. Unofficially, Mara told me that officers had discovered a hidden room in the basement containing personal items belonging to numerous people who had been reported missing over the previous 3 years. All had been delivery drivers of one kind or another, postal workers, couriers, food delivery people. The package that I had refused to deliver was later opened up by the police. It contained surgical instruments and chemicals commonly used for embalming. As for the girl, she wasn't Marion Fletcher's daughter at all. According to records, Marion Fletcher had no children. The girl's true identity remains unknown. She was placed in a specialized facility after repeatedly insisting that mother would come for her and for anyone who had actually seen her true face. One of the unspoken aspects of being a rural delivery driver is that you sometimes become an impromptu roadside assistance provider. In areas where cell service is spotty and houses are few and far between, a broken down motorist might wait hours for help if not for a passing delivery van. Over my first year with R&R, I had stopped several times to help out stranded drivers, providing jumper cables, changing flat tires, or simply offering to call a tow truck when I reached an area with better reception. My boss never explicitly discouraged this, though he did remind me that my primary responsibility was to complete my deliveries safely and on schedule. But rule number 7 seemed to contradict this unofficial Good Samaritan policy. Why ignore someone who might actually need help? What danger could come from stopping for a stranded person signaling with their horn? Well, I got my answer on a rainy Tuesday in April, while delivering to the handful of properties along the remote northeastern border of Addison County. The area was pretty empty even by Vermont standards. Miles of dense forest broken occasionally by small farms or hunting cabins. Cell service didn't even exist and the narrow roads were often in poor repair, winding through terrain too rugged for conventional agricultural development. I was on the last leg of my day with only 2 deliveries remaining when I heard it. Somebody honking the horn of their car in a rhythmic pattern. 3 short blasts, a pause, and then 3 more. The international distress signal. The sound came from somewhere up ahead around a sharp bend in the road. Protocol dictated that I should turn around immediately, but somebody could be hurt or possibly worse. How could I live with myself if I drove away from somebody who really needed my help? I slowed as I approached the bend, debating what to do. The honking continued, growing more insistent. I rounded the curve and saw a blue sedan pulled halfway onto the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the rain. The driver was still inside, a silhouette visible through the rain-streaked windows, repeatedly pressing on the horn. I pulled up behind the car, leaving my engine running and my lights on. Through my windshield, I could see the driver's side door of the sedan open slightly. A hand emerged, waving weakly, beckoning me closer. My instincts were screaming at me to leave, but my conscience wouldn't allow it. I decided on a compromise. I would call out from my van window, offer to call for help when I reached an area with service, but not approach the vehicle directly. I lowered my window just enough to call out, "Hey, are you alright? And do you need me to call somebody when I get back to town?" The sedan's door opened wider and a man half fell out, catching himself in the door frame. He was middle-aged, heavy-set, wearing what looked like a business suit, though I couldn't make out the details through the rain. He seemed to be favoring his left leg. "Please," he called back, his voice strained. "I think it's broken. My leg, I can't drive. Could you just help me back into my seat and then I can call for help?" Something about his story didn't add up. If he was injured, why had he gotten out of the car at all? And if he had a phone, why was he honking for help instead of calling directly? "I'm sorry, but I can't leave my vehicle," I replied. "Company policy. But I can definitely call someone for you when I get back to a place with service." The man's posture changed subtly, a straightening of the shoulders, a shift in weight that suggested his leg might not be injured after all. "You sure about that, friend?" His voice had changed too, dropping the note of pain and taking on a harder edge. "It's awfully lonely out here. Be a shame if something happened to your van. Flat tire maybe, no cell service. Miles from anywhere." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain. As I watched, two more figures emerged from the woods on the far side of the road, men in dark clothing moving with purpose toward my van. I threw the transmission into reverse, ready to back up and turn around, when I noticed a fourth figure directly behind my van, visible only as a dark shape in my side mirror, standing in the middle of the road where nobody had been seconds before. I was boxed in. The man from the sedan was approaching now, all pretense of injury gone. In his hand was something metallic that caught the light, a tire iron or a crowbar. "Hey, just stay calm and get out of the van," he called, his voice almost friendly now. "We only want what you're carrying. You can walk away from this." R&R handled all sorts of deliveries, but we rarely transported anything of significant value. Mostly household items, clothes, books, occasional electronics. Nothing worth risking an armed robbery for. But then I remembered my final delivery of the day. A small package headed for a jewelry repair shop. The contents listed simply as estate items for appraisal. I had to make a decision fast. The man with the crowbar was less than 10 feet from my driver's side door. The two from the woods were approaching from the passenger side, and the fourth remained behind me, blocking my retreat. In that moment, though, I recalled something my boss had mentioned during my training almost as an aside. The van has certain modifications, safety features. You probably won't need them, but it's good to know that they're there. At the time, I had assumed he had meant standard security, an alarm system perhaps, or a GPS tracker. But now I wondered if there might be something more. Under the dashboard, partially concealed by the steering column, was a small red button that I had noticed before but had never had a reason to press. Emergency features in vehicles were often colored red. With nothing to lose, I pressed it. Nothing happened at first, but then a high-pitched whine emanated from somewhere beneath the van, quickly rising in pitch until it became inaudible. The men approaching from the woods stopped suddenly, looking around in confusion. The man with the crowbar hesitated, and then he continued toward my door, raising the metal bar. "Get out now," he shouted, no longer bothering with the friendly pretense. I hadn't backed up yet, afraid of hitting the person behind me, but in my mirror I saw the fourth figure suddenly drop to his knees, hands clasped over his ears, face contorted in what appeared to be pain. The same reaction rippled through the others, the two from the woods stumbling, disoriented, and finally the man with the crowbar, who let out a howl of rage and pain before swinging wildly at my window. The glass cracked, but it held. I shifted into drive and floored the accelerator, aiming for the narrow gap between the sedan and the edge of the road. The van fishtailed in the mud but kept moving, scraping past the sedan with a shriek of metal on metal. In my mirror, I saw the men recovering already, the effect of whatever sonic deterrent the van had deployed apparently fading quickly. The man who had posed as the stranded driver was back on his feet, screaming something that I couldn't hear and pointing after me. I drove well over the speed limit all the way back to the depot, constantly checking behind me for any signs of pursuit from the men. There were none. When I finally pulled into the R&R parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely turn off the engine. My boss was there waiting for me, concern evident on his weathered face. "You activated the defense system," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, still trying to process what had happened. Well, there were 4 of them. They tried to make it look like somebody needed help, but they wanted to rob the van. My boss sighed heavily. "Not the van, they wanted you." "Me? Why would they?" "Because they always want the drivers." He interrupted, his voice tight with an emotion that I couldn't immediately identify. "Have you ever wondered why we have these rules? Why we're so careful about when and where we deliver? It's not just about efficiency or customer service." He led me into his office and closed the door. From a filing cabinet, he removed a thick folder and placed it on the desk between us. "R&R deliveries have been operating in Addison County for 73 years, he said, opening the folder to reveal yellowed newspaper clippings and faded photographs. "In that time, 46 of our drivers have disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances." The photograph showed delivery drivers throughout the decades, men and women in various styles of R&R uniforms, standing beside vehicles ranging from ancient panel trucks to more modern vans, like the one that I drove. Most of these disappearances have been officially attributed to accidents, animal attacks, or exposure to the elements. But we know better. There is something about this area, something that attracts a certain kind of predator. Not just human, though God knows we have our share of those too. "What do you mean, not just human?" I asked, unsure if I wanted to hear the answer. My boss looked at me for a long moment as if deciding how much to reveal. "You've followed the rules, Ellis. You've seen what happens when they're broken. You tell me, do you think all of the dangers you've encountered have been natural?" Before I could answer, he continued. "The incident today is what we call a horn trap. It's one of the oldest tricks, but it's still effective. A group that calls themselves the Collectors sets them up 2 or 3 times a year, targeting delivery drivers, postal workers, anyone who might be alone on those back roads." "But why? What do they want?" "Different things from different victims. Some they rob and release. Others..." He trailed off, and then tapped a photograph of a young man in a 90s-style R&R uniform. Calvin Wilson disappeared after responding to a distress call much like the one that you described. 2 weeks later, parts of him were found scattered across 3 different properties, each piece carefully preserved. I felt sick. And the police. They do what they can, which isn't much. The Collectors are careful. They move around, change their methods, and they have connections in the area. People who look the other way. "So that sonic device in the van, a deterrent. It emits a frequency that causes disorientation and pain in humans. It doesn't last long, but it gives our drivers a chance to get away. We installed them 5 years ago after losing 2 drivers in a single month." I thought about the other rules now, seeing them in a new light. Not just superstitions or local legends, but a defense system built from hard-won experience, each rule a response to a specific threat. "The rules, they keep you alive," my boss said, closing the folder. "They're not perfect, nothing is out there, but they're the best protection we have against what's waiting in these woods and the back roads." He paused, studying my face. "The question is, knowing what you know now, do you still want this job?" I should have quit on the spot. I mean, any sane person would have. But something about the way that he asked, as if he already knew my answer, as if he had seen something in me from the beginning that I hadn't recognized in myself, made me hesitate. "What happens if I stay?" I asked. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You keep delivering packages, you follow the rules, and eventually you help train the next driver, pass on what you've learned. And if I go..." The smile faded. "Then you go, but they know your face now, the Collectors. They don't forget and they don't forgive being thwarted. Just something to consider. I did consider it for all of about 30 seconds, and then I nodded once. I'll stay. He didn't seem surprised. He just handed me a new laminated card, identical to my original rule card, but with one addition at the bottom. Rule number 8. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, then it's wrong. Do not second guess yourself. Welcome to the real R&R deliveries, he said, extending his hand. The job gets a lot stranger from here. He wasn't exaggerating either. In the 3 years since that day, I've learned that the first 7 rules were only the beginning. A starter kit for navigating the strange ecosystem that existed out here in the remote corner of Vermont. I've encountered things that defy explanation, people who shouldn't exist, and dangers that no delivery training manual could ever prepare you for. I have broken rules when necessary and created new ones based on my own bitter experience. I've lost colleagues and found unlikely allies. And through it all, I've continued to deliver packages to the remote homes and hidden corners of Addison County, because that's the job. Somebody has to do it, and better someone who knows the rules than someone who doesn't. I was the first person from my family to go to university, and as I packed up my car and got ready to leave home, I felt proud and excited. There was sadness as well. I would miss my parents and still wondered what might have been if Mary Beth and I had stayed together. She was my first love, and it still hurt that we had broken up. Even as I started the car and turned to give my parents a goodbye wave, it was her that I was thinking of. I focused on the road ahead. I would see my parents again when I came back for a visit at the end of the term, and no doubt I would see Mary Beth around town then as well, though hopefully not with Todd, her new boyfriend. It was warm, a clear day in early September as my hometown slipped away behind me, and I was soon on the interstate with the radio on. I would meet plenty of girls at university, I told myself, and I turned the music up. The campus I would be studying at was on a city center site, and I found accommodation in a student residence close by. After a long day's drive, I reached my destination, parked up and climbed out of my car. My back was aching and my neck was stiff from all the hours behind the wheel, but as I stood on the sidewalk and took a first look at my new neighborhood, I soon forgot about my discomfort. There was a myriad of stores that seemed to sell everything under the sun, and I could see at least half a dozen bars and restaurants within a few minutes' walk. I wasn't old enough to go in the bars, and from the looks of the restaurants, I doubted that I would be able to afford to eat in them, but that wasn't the point. They were pulsing with life, the whole street was, and it was infectious. And then a police car sped past, its siren blaring. I was in such a good mood, this felt exciting rather than worrying. In my small hometown, the sound of a police siren after dark would have set off a chorus of barking dogs and twitching curtains. Here, I seemed to be the only person who was paying any notice to it. Even the busker across the road had not missed a note in his enthusiastic rendition of an 80s classic as the car passed. It had charted when I had still been a glint in my parents' eyes, but it was one of those songs that endured. The busker hit an especially high note and coins clinked into his open guitar case from people walking by. Somebody was filming the busker as well, a young woman maybe a couple of years older than me. Her long dark hair hung almost to her waist, and I only realized that I was staring when she had finished filming, turned around and glanced at me. I felt my cheeks coloring, looking down on my feet and sensed rather than saw her walking towards me. "Hey newbie," she said brightly. I looked up. She was very pretty and she was smiling at me, so I needed to say something dazzling and funny and cool. I failed. Instead I said, "Hey, how do you know that I'm new?" She turned to my car and replied, "From the number of things packed into your car that were clearly put there by parents, Top tip: it's not worth the effort of carrying most of those things up to your room. I grinned, and I knew exactly what she meant. I had boxes of groceries that I had bought when I arrived, but my mom insisted that I bring them just in case. She had not specified in case of what. Possibly a zombie apocalypse that left the city stores all out of canned soup and toilet paper. I grinned sheepishly and replied, "It won't be too bad. I can use the elevator." She threw her head back and laughed. "The elevator? That hasn't worked since I moved in." I knew that my room was on the 18th floor and the prospect of having to get everything up that many stairs was stressful. But on the plus side, this gorgeous young woman was going to be one of my neighbors, so life wasn't all that bad, I figured. Especially if I could get to know her better. I said. "Well, in that case, maybe you could give me a hand carrying it up. We could maybe go out afterwards and I could buy you a coffee as a thank you. Or a pizza," I added hastily, thinking how weak a coffee sounded the moment the words were out of my mouth. She laughed again. "Good try," she said. "See you around. Maybe." And with that, she was gone, letting herself into the student apartment block with a swipe card. I stood there still smiling for a minute and then took a deep breath and started unloading my car. What felt like an absolute age later, I collapsed onto the bed in my new room surrounded by boxes. I was exhausted, and as my eyes closed, I thought how all I wanted to do was sleep. Which was the moment that the music started up. It sounded like it was coming from the room directly below mine. A bass beat that felt like it was making my entire room shake. I lay there with my eyes open, now wide open. All my neighbors were students, so it was no surprise really that there was music blaring out. I checked the time on my phone. It was 10 p.m. So, late for sharing your tunes at volume, but not completely unreasonable, I decided. I sighed and rolled off the bed and decided to unpack. Hopefully soon the music would quit and I could get to sleep. 4 hours later, just after 2 a.m., the music finally stopped. I was so relieved that I lay back down on the bed. The quiet was bliss. 10 minutes later, I heard a door slamming and voices in the room next door, and then a new sound system had started up. I pulled a pillow around my head and wished the world would just go away. At some point, the party next door must have ended, or I was so tired that I fell asleep anyway despite the music. When I woke, I felt blurry and was not so sure where I was. I blinked around and looked at the half-unpacked boxes in the strange room and remembered. I rolled off the bed and went to get breakfast. There were plenty of places to eat with prices that wouldn't break the bank, scattered among the more upmarket joints that offered artisan bread and organic everything. After bacon, grits, and a stack of pancakes drowned in syrup, I started to feel human again despite my sleep deprivation, and I opened up my laptop. Classes started in a couple of days, and I had a reading list that I had barely started, but I had a more pressing concern. I needed to find a job to make ends meet. The weekdays would have to be set aside for my studies, but that left nights and weekends for earning money. I had already emailed my resume to hundreds of organizations based in the city, but had either heard nothing back or received a standard anonymous response. I checked again and there was still no positive news in my inbox. Well, I wasn't going to give up. I couldn't afford to. And now that I was here in the city, I could take a more direct approach by calling in person into offices and shops and bars and ask to speak with a manager. I set off, full of hope, but after hours of trying, I had achieved nothing. I was left thoroughly deflated. It had been humiliating. With the sun starting to set in the sky, I slumped down onto a bench and tried to think of alternative ways to earn money. Perhaps I could volunteer for medical experiments and risk developing mutant powers. Or perhaps sell an organ. There must have been something that I did not need. I was wondering if leaving home had been a mistake when I noticed a sign in the window of the building opposite. The building at first glance looked derelict and the sign was just about visible under smeared-on dirt. It read, "Delivery drivers wanted," and it was handwritten. It was massively uninspiring, but I was desperate. I got to my feet and went to look for an entrance to the building. I found a door around the back in an alley and a broken glass crunched under my feet as I walked up to it. I pressed the intercom, and when there was no answer at first, I spoke into it. "Hey, I saw your sign." There was a crackling sound when the door buzzed open. Here goes nothing, I thought, and I went in. I found myself in a shabby reception area. An air conditioner rattled and flies circled a dusty light bulb that hung from the ceiling. There was a desk in the center of the room with no one sitting at it and an open hatch in the wall behind it. Next to the hatch, there was another door, one presumably that would take you into the rest of the building. I noticed as well that there was a strange smell in that room, a rank odor that made me want to put my hand over my nose and mouth. I was wondering what it was when the door in front of me opened and a man walked in. He brought a wave of the fetid smell in with him. From his odor and the way that he looked, I don't think he must have washed or changed his clothes for months or maybe years. His hair was greased into his side part and his fingernails were caked with dirt. And the worst was to come. "You hear about the delivery driver job?" he asked, and his breath carried across the room and hit me in the face. I should have said, "It's all a mistake." Then I could have got out of there and back into the relatively fresh air of the city. Car fumes would have never smelled so good. But I said, "Yeah." "You have your own vehicle?" he asked. "Yes." I managed to answer while trying not to gag. "Good," he said. "So when can you start?" Through the mental haze caused by the assault on my senses, I wondered if that was it. What about my resume? What about my references? And did he need to get my insurance and license? Feeling flustered, I asked, "Do you mean that I've got the job?" "Yep," he replied. "After you make each delivery, come back to the depot and I'll pay you cash in hand. I'll go get your first package now." And with that, he went back through the door. His smell lingered. A couple of minutes later, a small brown cardboard box with an address handwritten on it appeared in the hatch. The man peered through after it. "I've got just one rule," he said. "Do not ever look inside the package. You got that?" I gulped and nodded and I picked up the box. Back outside, I took a moment to try and regain my composure. I was both grossed out and delighted. Grossed out because that dude had some serious personal hygiene issues, and delighted because I had found a job, and one for which I would get paid in cash as soon as I delivered the package that I was holding. Time to get busy, I told myself and hurried over to my car. I put the package in the passenger seat and I set off. My Maps app directed me to an area of old 1- and 2-story houses tucked away beyond high-rise offices. They all appeared to be abandoned. There were piles of rubble as well in places that made me think the houses here were in the process of being demolished. That seemed inevitable. Once they were cleared, this would be a prime location for new residential developments. Until then, it was Gloomville, and I spent a while driving up and down the old streets, trying to read house numbers. Finally, I found the house that I was looking for and I parked up outside of it. The paint on the wooden boards on the house's facade was peeling away, and all of the windows were boarded up. But the number next to the porch matched the one on the package. Telling myself that this must be the right place, I picked up the package from the passenger seat. It felt sticky underneath. I lifted it up and I looked at the base. A dark stain had spread out over the cardboard box. Something inside of it had leaked. And much worse, whatever it was, it had leaked all over my car seat. I cursed, hoping that I wouldn't have to spend my fee for the delivery on getting my car cleaned. I climbed out of the car and I carried the package up to the house. It was only when I was at the front door that I noticed the package was still leaking. A blob of dark liquid dropped from the base and landed on the ground next to my feet. It wasn't just leaking, it was dripping. I looked back along the sidewalk. It had left a trail of dark droplets between my car and the house. My first delivery was going downhill and fast. I wanted to hand over the package and get out of there before things got any worse. Only if I rang the bell and handed over the package, the person that I gave it to would realize straight away that it was damaged. They would refuse delivery, would start demanding compensation, and I wouldn't get paid. I couldn't let the scenario that had played out in my head happen, so I put the package down and then rang the bell and made a hasty exit. It was a lousy plan B, but it was all that I could think of. I was almost back in my car when I heard the door open. I crouched down and looked back. The door hung half open. There was no light showing from inside, and at first, no sign of anybody there. And then a hand reached out. Its fingers were long and bony, and its fingernails were overgrown and twisted. These curled, almost claw-like things scraped over the package and then began to draw it into the house in the waiting darkness. The door closed. I was left crouching there, wiping away a bead of cold sweat which had trickled down my face. I opened the car door, got in, and started the engine and drove away. It had been a very unsettling experience. By the time that I got back to the depot, I was almost feeling better. When the man who had hired me handed over my payment, I felt a lot better. "That's great," I told him, putting the bills in my pocket. "Whatever," he growled. "And be back here tomorrow night and don't be late." I smiled and headed off. Back at my student housing, I trapezed up the stairs. This time, I didn't even make it through my front door before I heard the loud music blaring out. It seemed to be coming from at least 3 different directions. Resigning myself to the fact that every night was party night where I now lived, I let myself into my room and I laid on my bed. I got no sleep this time, and when I saw the sky lighting with the approaching dawn, I got up and went out to see if I could clean the stain off my car seat myself. As a street cleaner rattled past in their truck, I popped the lock and leaned in. In the glowing light of the new day, I could now see that the stain was dark red, and I had an awful feeling that I knew what it was. I had only ever seen this much blood on crime shows on TV, but there it was, soaked into the fabric of my seat. My shoulders slumped. No amount of scrubbing with a wet cloth and soap suds would get it out. I got my phone out and I was searching online to try and find out how much it would cost me to get the seat cleaned professionally, when I smelled a pleasant fragrance from behind me. I turned and saw the young woman from the evening before. Her long hair was elegantly plaited and she was wearing running gear. She also looked fresh and full of energy. I rubbed my face. When I had glimpsed in a mirror before coming outside, I had seen the dark patches under my eyes. I was exhausted and I looked it. Yet, she had clearly had a good night's sleep. I was about to ask her how she did that, but she was peering over my shoulder at the passenger seat. "Wow," she said. "Did you murder your passenger last night?" I was shocked at her accusation and said with a catch in my voice, "No." And then I saw the cheeky smile on her face. "I've got a job as a delivery driver, and one of the packages leaked." "What was in the package?" she asked. I really hadn't considered that. I had been too stressed at the time, and I scratched my chin and said, "Raw meat, perhaps. Something rare that you can't get in a regular store." "Yeah, it could be," she replied and then added, "Anyway, gotta get going. See you later." And with that, she jogged away. I went back to looking for a solution to my ruined seat. After 30 minutes of clicking and scrolling, I did not find anything that I felt I could afford, so I decided to leave it for a while. I had a lot of other things that I wanted to get done. I needed to arrange my student photo ID, register with the university library, and spend some serious time on my reading list. The day passed quickly and I was feeling pleased with myself as I set off for the depot. I had put a towel over my seat so I wouldn't have to look at it, and out of sight, out of mind, it was working for me as I pulled up outside of the depot. The miasma of stale armpits and worse met me as I was buzzed in. The man was on the other side of the hatch with a package ready for me. It was around the same size as the last one, and it looked sturdy enough, and dry. I wanted to ask if it would stay that way, but to do so, it would risk alerting him to what had really happened with my last delivery. So I grinned and said, "Great," and then I took the package out to my car. When I saw that the address written on the package was for a regular apartment block in a good district, I felt reassured that this one was going to be a breeze. The journey was easy and I found a parking space on a well-lit street. I checked all sides of the package and relieved to see nothing had leaked out. I put it under my arm and went to find a soon-to-be satisfied customer's front door. There was no answer on the buzzer for the number and the address, so I tried a couple more until somebody let me in. The interior of the building was clean and smelled of air freshener and the elevator was working. I caught it up to the 5th floor, stepped out into a pleasant passageway and found the apartment that I was looking for. I pressed the buzzer and knocked, but there was no answer. Not a problem, I thought. I would leave it outside of the door. I put it down and smiled, and the package moved. It rocked slightly from side to side. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. I was tired and I must have imagined that the package had moved. Surely. It rocked again faster this time, and I heard a dull thud come from inside. I frowned. I wasn't imagining this. There seemed to be something inside of the package and it was stirring. A louder thud sounded and the package jerked to one side. Whatever was in there was exerting some serious force. The package rattled and shook. The thudding was constant now, and then the package broke open. It was a small split just below where the address was written on. I instinctively took a step backwards. A second break appeared in the package close to the first and something emerged through it. It was dark and sharp and was moving from side to side. It looked like some kind of limb, and another one was beginning to break free from the first split. And another, this one from a tear in the base of the package. As I watched with a mounting sense of horror, a dozen dark limbs appeared from inside of the package. Some probed and twitched into space. Others found the floor and slowly, uncertainly, they began to crawl. Propelled by the legs of the things inside it, the package began to head towards me. I tried to run away, but I was so freaked out that I tripped myself up and ended up sprawled out on the floor. I looked up and saw the hideously animated package was almost on me. One of its limbs was flickering against my sneaker. I didn't hear the elevator open, did not realize someone had stepped out from it, until I saw arms reaching down and lifting the package up. The limbs went into a frenzy, but now they were clawing at nothing. I looked up into a face that was twisted with rage. "What have you done?" the man standing over me demanded. "This rare specimen is to have pride of place in my collection. If you have hurt it, I will sue you." And with that outburst, he stormed to his door with the package and hurried inside. I was left still, sitting on my backside. "How would you rate your delivery today on a scale of 1 to 5? I asked the empty passageway and then began to laugh hysterically. I gave it 20 minutes so that I could calm down before driving back to the depot to collect my money. I found the man waiting once more behind the hatch with a new package. I wasn't sure my nerves were up to it and asked, "Do you have another driver who could take it? You do the jobs that I allocate to you or you don't get paid anything," he told me with an ugly sneer on his face. "Fine," I said under my breath and took the package. I didn't need to look at the address to know where I was taking it because it started to leak blood before I'd even gotten it to the car. Muttering to myself, I put it on the towel of the passenger seat and I set off. I drove faster than I normally would and arrived at the house in good time. More of its neighboring houses had been demolished and there was a digger parked up as well. The redevelopment of the area seemed to be picking up pace. I picked up my own pace, hopped out of the car and put the package down outside of the house, and then I pressed the bell and made myself scarce. I was back in the car when the door had opened. I peered over at the darkness revealed, at the pale figure standing in its midst. Its eyes were dark voids in its face, its nose was flattened and its ears rose into sharp tips. It was holding the package in its grotesque grip. Blood was dripping from the package, and as I watched, the creature's tongue flickered out and flicked the blood. It smiled, showing teeth that looked like shards of glass, and then it retreated back into the house and closed the door. I was left terrified. My hands were shaking so badly. It took me 3 goes to get the key in the ignition, and as I drove away, I vowed to never return. My very short career as a delivery driver was over. I just couldn't take the weirdness. When I arrived back at the depot, I didn't tell the malodorous man about my decision. I took the money and I ran. Feeling relieved that I'd never have to see or smell him again, I arrived back at my student accommodation. Even from the roadside, I could hear music blaring out from inside, so I decided to sleep in the car. I closed my eyes and leaned back. I slept restlessly, and when dawn had finally arrived, I felt dreadful. I was sitting there aching all over and feeling about 90 years old when somebody tapped on my window. It was the young woman. She looked more beautiful every time that I saw her. I wound the window down and smiled in what I hoped was an irresistibly handsome way. "Hey, did you get locked out last night?" "No," I replied. "I'm finding it hard to sleep in my room because of all the noise." She laughed and said, "Do you want to come up to my room? I have something that will help." I mean, how could I say no? Her room was chaotic, with clothes, books, and pictures everywhere. She rooted around inside a pile of tops lying tangled on the floor and brought out a small plastic container. "Hey, try these," she said. "They're noise-canceling earbuds. I have the new model, so you're welcome to have these." "That's amazing," I said. "Hopefully things will get better now." "You seem to be doing okay. I mean, you've got your job." I frowned and told her about the package that had sprouted legs and described the strange figure that I had seen when I dropped off that second leaking package. I expected her to be shocked, but she looked excited. "Wow," she exclaimed. "That sounds like a vampire and I love them. You have to let me know next time you're going to deliver to it." She gave me her phone number and made me promise to message her. All thoughts of giving up the job as a delivery driver had forgotten. I told her that I would, and I left her room with a big grin on my face. That night, I headed for the depot building, hoping that there would be another package dripping with blood waiting for me. There wasn't. The man, smelling rank as ever, told me that I had to collect the package from a different location tonight, and I would be given the delivery address for it when I did. I had zero enthusiasm for this until he let me know where the collection was to be made. As soon as I was outside, I sent a message. "Hey, I'm heading to the vampire's house now." Moments after I pressed send, a reply came. "Take me with you." Yes, I thought, and we arranged a place for me to pick her up. 30 minutes later, I was driving through the night with a beautiful girl by my side. She had brought a cushion with her so she didn't have to sit on the messed up cover of the passenger seat, and her cheeks were flushed with excitement. For my part, I decided to ask her out on a date as soon as I could get the courage, and I was desperately hoping that she would say yes. In the meantime, there was the small matter of a package to collect. I pulled up in my usual place. More houses had been demolished, and I guess the house we were going to was due to be knocked down soon. I wondered if perhaps the strange creature who lived there was moving out because of this. I must admit, I didn't truly believe it was a vampire. It was grade A freaky looking, but that did not automatically make it one of the undead. Still, I was feeling very apprehensive now the moment to see it face to face again had arrived. I pressed the bell. My gorgeous companion had refused to stay in the car and had come with me. She was so stoked that she could not stand still as we waited for a response. But there was nothing. I was about to press the bell again when she put her hand on my arm and said, "Wait." And then she pushed the door. It creaked and opened. "Result," she said brightly and stepped inside. I took a deep breath and followed. Bugs with far too many legs scurried out of our way as we walked along a dark hallway. There was a large room at the end of it. I would have been very happy to not go into it, but she was hurrying ahead. She made her way into the room and then came to a halt and stopped. I walked up to her side and I understood why. The room was lit by a single candle in an ornate gold holder. Dark curtains hung over the windows, keeping the outside world away, and there were bones all over the floor. I thought of the packages that I had delivered and my theory that they had held raw meat. It looked like that I had been right and that this feast dripping with blood had been a regular delivery to the creature that had lived here. My companion took my arm and said, "Look." In an anteroom, there was a coffin on a table. She walked over to it and looked at the lid. And then she turned around and her eyes were shining as she told me, "It's got a note taped to it saying that it's for collection, and there's a delivery address as well." She clapped her hands together and added a delighted, "Amazing." I was still not happy about the whole business and said, "Okay, well, let's get the coffin in the car then. The sooner that we get it delivered, the better." Well, after we look inside, she said gleefully, I remembered the disgusting guy at the depot's rule about never looking inside a package and said, "I really don't think that's a good idea." She wrinkled her nose up in the cutest way and replied, "Spoil sport." But she didn't ask again, and together we carried the coffin out to the car. It just about fit under the back seats, and I was relieved when we drove away from the house. Being reduced to rubble was the best thing that could happen to the place in my opinion. The delivery address was in a part of the city that neither of us had ever heard of, and I got completely lost. Between the stress of that and the strange package, and still trying to get up the nerve to ask for a date, my gut started to churn and I had to stop off at a diner so that I could use the restroom. I was the only person in the place apart from a tired-looking waitress. Once I had visited the restroom, I bought a couple of coffees to go, even though caffeine was the last thing that I needed, and then I returned to the car. It was empty. The passenger door was open in one of the back seats. As I came closer, I saw that the lid of the coffin was open as well. I started to feel sick with worry. Had curiosity gotten the better of her, and had she looked inside of the coffin? I peered into the coffin through the car window. There was nothing in there either. I swore out loud and began to look around frantically, and it was then that I saw the body laying on the ground. It was near a dark corner of the diner, and I hurried over. It was the young woman. I knelt down and touched her face, and 2 trails of blood ran from cuts on her neck. She had been so full of life, so beautiful, and now she was gone. I began to cry. She must have disturbed the vampire in its coffin, and it had lashed out, had fed on her and stolen her life. As I knelt there weeping, I suddenly became aware of movement nearby. I turned, thinking that it might be the waitress, and I saw the vampire crouching in the shadows. Its hideous, bat-like head was tilted to one side, and its tongue flickered out. Its mouth hung slightly open, and I could see dark red stains on its teeth. "You did this," I said as anger flared inside me. "You," I screamed. It looked at me and it smiled, and then its wings unfurled from its back and it sped into the sky and away. I was nothing to it, and the young woman it had killed was growing cold in the ground next to me. I picked her body up and I carried it over to the car. My mind was racing, and I'm not sure why, but I put her in the empty coffin as gently as I could and then closed the lid in the car door. I think I did not want anybody else to see her like that. I went to sit in the driver's seat. I felt utterly lost and alone and more scared than I ever had been in my life. With dawn still hours away, I desperately tried to think what I should do next. I was still trying to think when I heard the back door click open. I span around, shock sent cold waves through my body. The lid of the coffin was once more loose and it was empty, and there was someone standing outside the car. Her long dark hair hung down her back almost to her waist. Feeling as if I was in a dream, I climbed out of the car. She turned to me and smiled. Her lips were pale and her fangs razor sharp. "Help me," she said in a quiet voice. "I'm thirsty. I need to feed." Since that night, I've stayed with her. I watch over her coffin while she sleeps during the day. After dusk, I drive her to places where she can hunt for new victims to sate her bloodlust. I will do this as long as she needs me, because she is my dark mistress, my savage, beautiful creature of the night.